Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Time story, we ride the stories of the West Campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The wire along the tracks sang as the wind worried it, a thin metallic whine stretched over the red flats. Dust pushed through the stagecoach seams, a taste of iron on Evelyn Hart's tongue. She cupped a loose silver button in her palm and rolled it with her thumb. It had once belonged to a dress that never saw a wedding night. The button was cool. Everything else was heat. Across from her, a gambler shuffled cards that no one wanted to see. Beside her, a traveling salesman slept with his mouth open, breath sour with whiskey. The coach swayed. Leather creaked. Outside, a blanched horizon ran on forever, Oregon mountains like torn paper teeth to the north. Prospect Ridge by sundown, the driver had promised. Evie did not believe in promises. The telegraph wire thrummed again. The sound settled under her skin. The shot cracked like a plate dropped on stone. The salesman buckled sideways onto her shoulder. Warmth spread through his vest. He said, "Oh," as if he had misplaced something small. Then he slid to the floorboards. The coach lurched. Hooves pounded. The gambler reached for his boot fingers, clumsy on the derringer hidden there. The door jerked open. Dust swirled. A man filled the frame. Beard, thick eyes, pale hat, rim, chewed a Sharps rifle in one hand. Like it weighed nothing. He smelled of sweat and old tobacco. "Guns on the floor," he said. His voice came through easy, like a man calling a dog. The gambler lifted the derringer. The bearded man did not sigh. He shot the gambler in the face. The sound was a short, hard pop inside the crowded coach. Cards fluttered into dust. Evie did not move. Her tongue felt too large for her mouth. She tasted iron again. She closed her fingers tight around the button until the edge bit skin. "Out," the man said. He waved the rifle like a conductor's baton. She stumbled into light so clean it hurt. Heat pressed down. The road was a scar through low scrub. 3 riders circled the horses. 2 more dragged the strongbox into the shade of a mesquite. A woman with painted cheeks stood with her hands up. Her eyes were too bright. Blood dotted her sleeve. "Name's Brock Harlan," the bearded man said, as if they had been introduced. He kicked the strongbox and grinned when it rang. "You got people, miss." He glanced at the book sticking from her carpet bag. The gold letters caught the sun. Hart, Holy Bible. "My father is a minister," Evie said. The words sounded borrowed. Harlan's grin tipped. "Preacher's girl. Does he write letters with money inside?" "There is no one," she said. That was the truest thing she owned. Harlan studied her face. There was a moment where he weighed something only he could see. He tipped his hat the way a man does before he cheats at cards. "Folks buy whiskey and bullets, but people bring better trades. Mount her." Rope bit her wrists. A rough hand slapped a dun pony's flank, and the world began to move too fast. The coach shrank in the glare. The telegraph wire went quiet as they turned off the road. The taste of metal stayed. They rode into Red Basin, where the earth bled its color into everything. The air smelled like a forge. In the middle distance, saguaros lifted arms that looked like surrender. At the edge of a dry wash, a small knot of riders waited quiet as rocks. No paint, no feathers. Their horses flicked flies. The sun made a white rim around hair and cheekbones. The man at the front did not speak. A long, white scar tugged at the corner of his mouth, as if it had tried to pull the words out and failed. His eyes were so dark she could not tell pupil from iris. He moved like a man who had already measured the ground. Harlan rode ahead and raised his voice. "Gifts for the Stone River Band, rifles, whiskey, 2 good army horses with new shoes." He pointed behind without looking. "And a bonus. A woman who will not scream. I tried to make her." Evie felt heat rise that had nothing to do with the sun. The riders watched as if they were looking at an animal. She kept her chin level. She did not give them the whites of her eyes. The quiet man dismounted and walked toward her. The set of his shoulders did not change. He looked at the rope on her wrists, then at Harlan. Horses. Powder. His English was rough stone over water. He did not look at Evie again. Harlan laughed. "You always do the math first, Ridge." He named him that way. Cane Ridge. Powder for ponies. The girl is a sweetener. They haggled the way men haggle over weight and distance. The quiet man did not raise his voice. Harlan did. The trade landed on the ground between them. When the rope fell off Evie's wrists, it left bracelet marks. Harlan slapped her shoulder hard enough to move her. He was already counting ponies with his eyes. "Ride with Ridge," someone said behind her. "Or walk." Cane Ridge did not touch her. He only stepped to his horse and swung up. He did not check to see if she followed. She did. Her legs worked because the horse did, because the earth agreed not to shake. They rode until the sun let go of them. Heat changed to a thin blade of cold. The sky was more stars than dark. Cain tossed a blanket near her feet and went about his fire. He did not look at her. When he ate, he pushed a small strip of meat across the flat rock toward her without lifting his head. When she reached for water, he set the skin down and let go. His silence had weight. On the second night, the wind came off the Organ Mountains and cut through her dress. She woke with her teeth chattering and her fingers numb. A shadow moved. The blanket she had kicked aside slid back over her. His hands did not brush her skin. On the third day, the wash where they rested offered a wall of pale stone and the low shade of scrub. Evie watched Cain climb a ridge to look. The other rider checked a hoof with hands stained black by grease. The world dropped into a quiet so complete she could hear the blood move in her ears. The rope that had bound her lay loose at her side. There was a gap in the rocks. If she could slide through, she could be gone. Prospect Ridge could not be far. She had been a teacher. She had walked lanes between hedges since she was a child. She could walk now. She stood. Her legs felt made of someone else's wood. She did not look at the ridge where Cain stood. She did not look at the horse. She ran. She tore her skirt on Catclaw. She bled without feeling it. The air had the taste of old pennies. The sun did not move. She moved and everything else stayed in place. When the shade of a Palo Verde appeared, she fell under it and wrapped her arms around her knees. Her throat felt lined with grit. She closed her eyes because the sky did not care. Hoofbeats found her first. A shadow crossed her face. She opened her eyes to Cain's silence standing over her. He did not look winded. He did not look angry until he was. His eyes flared. He reached for her with a hand that did not shake and pulled her up like he was lifting a sack of flour. Her feet did not quite touch the ground. She made a sound she had never made before, small and folded in the middle. He walked her to his horse, threw her onto it, then swung up behind. His arm locked across her waist. It was not an embrace. It was a bar. His chest at her back felt like a wall. She could not tell if his heart was fast or if it was her own. The ride back was short and long at the same time. When they passed down into the wash, the other rider did not look up. The fire pit still held a red eye under ash. Cain set her down without ceremony. He did not speak to her. He did not speak to anyone that night. By noon of the next day, the land lifted and changed its skin. They turned into a cut where cottonwoods clung to whatever water gathered, and the air smelled like it remembered rain. The canyon walls rose in rapt sound. Evie heard voices before she saw people. Not loud voices. The steady wash of women working, the high call of a child, the 1-2 rhythm of a pestle hitting corn. A cluster of dome lodges rested under the trees. Smoke braided up and disappeared against red rock. Dogs lifted their heads. 2 boys froze with a stick between them as if a game had been trapped in amber. An old woman sat on a flat stone with a broken sandal in her lap. She did not smile, she did not frown. She watched as if her watching might keep something from breaking. Cain swung down and took his horse's lead. He touched Evie's elbow. The touch was light and not a question. The camp opened for them like a slow breath. Women turned their faces. Men looked and then did not. Children stared with the concentration of the very young. In Evie's nose, the smell of wood smoke braided with something green and bitter. He led her to the old woman. "Marta," he said. Just that. Marta Grayleaf looked Evie up to the line of her hair, then down to the dust on her shoes, then to the book that bumped her thigh. She grunted and pointed at a patch of ground near her fire. The point was law. "Stay." Evie folded to the ground. The dirt held heat. She placed the silver button in her pocket where it clicked against a thread spool. She set the Bible on her lap and kept her hand on it because she did not know where else to put her hands. Cain left without looking back. He walked toward the ring of men at the center where a blackened fire pit showed 100 old meals. A tall man with hair braided tight looked up as Cain came. The two stood in a silence that had texture. A skin door at the largest lodge stirred. A child stepped between Evie and the fire. He crouched and touched the hem of her skirt with 2 fingers. He felt the fabric and made a quiet sound. She had the sensation of being weighed like a sack of corn. The boy's mother reached from behind, drew him away, and pressed a cup of water into Evie's hands without meeting her eyes. The water tasted like stone. It was the best thing Evie had ever put in her mouth. She swallowed and set the cup down where Marta could see it. Marta nodded once. Around her, the camp moved as if nothing had changed. It had. The skin door at the large lodge lifted. A hand appeared, old and brown and lined with riverbeds. The flap rose higher. The firelight caught a face and a set of eyes that would decide everything she would be allowed to be. The opening widened. The skin door lifted. Smoke curled out and laid itself along the dust. A man stepped into the light with hair braided back and a face lined by weather. He wore a shirt the color of dry sage. A necklace of carved bone lay at his collar. His eyes found Cain first, then slid to the rope marks on Evie's wrists, then to the Bible on her lap. Chief Del Rio, Marta said without rising. Cain spoke in the band's language, low and plain. The chief listened without blinking, then nodded once. He did not speak to Evie. He lifted his hand, and the camp continued to move. Women shifted bowls. A dog trotted under a rack of drying meat. A boy snatched his stick back and ran. A decision had been made, not final, only today's. Marta tapped the metate with her bone needle and pointed to a heap of yellow kernels. She set a round stone in Evie's palms and shaped the motion with her own hands, rock over rock weight breath rhythm. The smell of ground corn rose sweet and dusty. Evie pressed too hard. The stone bounced and scraped. The sound turned heads. Marta clicked her tongue and took the mono away. She shoved a scraped hide into Evie's arms instead. It stank of fat. She placed a scraper in Evie's palm and pinched Evie's fingers to show how to pull. The first drag lifted a curl of white and a string of grease. The second tore the skin at the base of Evie's thumb. Blood beaded bright. Marta did not look up. By midday, Evie's hands stung as if she had been holding nettles. The old woman handed her 2 clay ollas and pointed at the path down to the wash. The jars were heavy against her hip bones. The path was narrow and cut by roots. At the water's lip, cottonwood leaves turned their pale bellies to the heat. Evie knelt and dipped. Mud climbed the sides of the jars like a stain. She stood slowly braced and began up. Cutter and Rafe were waiting at the corner where the path bent toward the lodges. Their eyes were polished with Tiswin. Rafe grinned without humor and stepped into the trail. Cutter let his gaze drift over Evie's hair and hands. He made a sound in his throat that did not need translation. "Let me pass," Evie said. Her voice had the texture of sand. Rafe lifted one jar's rim with a finger. The balance went to pieces. Water sloshed her dress and his boots. He laughed as he shook his foot. Cutter's grin sharpened. He reached for the other jar. It shattered when it hit the hard earth. Water rushed into dust and disappeared. The last sound was like a sigh. A hand closed on Cutter's shoulder. He froze. Cain stood behind him, breath-steady eyes, flat as cooled glass. He did not look at Evie. He spoke in one word that was not loud. Enough. Cutter shrugged like a colt testing a rope. He said something soft that made Rafe's smile tilt. Cain's palm struck Cutter in the chest. It was not a punch. It was a heel of a hand, straight and short. Cutter left his feet and landed on his back air, leaving him with a sound like a bellows. Cain did not watch him struggle up. He turned to Evie and picked up the broken lip of clay with 2 fingers. He set it down gently by the trail. He walked away without touching her. Marta met Evie halfway to the fire pit and pressed a cool gourd into her palm. "Drink," she said in English with a thick edge. Evie drank. The water tasted of roots. The old woman pushed a new task at her without comment. Evie took it with her bleeding hands. That evening the air changed. A wind came over the rock with the smell of electricity. The light went green at the edges. Cain had been a shadow at the rim of the camp since midday, watching the path in and the heights above. He came to Marta's fire and spoke to the old woman in half a sentence. Marta nodded and jerked her chin at Evie. They left with 2 horses, and no one stopped them. The canyon narrowed and turned. The Oregon mountains rose like rusted teeth. At a shoulder of rock, a square ghost of a cabin leaned into a slope 3 walls low and blackened. A roof on one corner hung by grace alone. Cain led the horses under the best of the cover and tied them short. The storm arrived without much warning. Rain came, first wide drops that pocked the dust, then wind, a hard hand shoving the ruin. Hail began to fall, small white stones rattling, then larger hammering the plank that served as roof. The air tasted like copper wire. Cain built a fire in the cradle of a broken hearth. Smoke crawled along the ground and then lifted. Evie's dress clung to her like another skin. She held her arms around her stomach and tried not to shiver. Cain pulled a blanket from his saddlebag, shook it once, and held it open. He did not look at her face. She crossed to him and slid under. The wool scratched. It smelled of horse and old rain. Heat moved from him into her and eased the ache in her spine. They sat with their shoulders touching, because there was no room to sit any other way. The fire made a small and steady sound. Hail hit, paused, hit again. Kane's breathing tightened and then softened. His hand rested on his knee scar, pale, where the fire found it. Evie watched the muscles in his jaw when thunder walked the ridge. His eyes went to the door opening and back to the flames, a cadence that had the shape of a habit he would never break. "Why here," she asked, "and not the camp?" "Fighting men talk when they are angry," he said. "A place to be quiet is better." "They think I am trouble," she said. He did not answer for a long time. "They think many things." She felt heat that was not only from the fire rise into her face. She listened to the hail rake the roof plank and the rain fill the spaces between the stones of the chimney. He shifted under the blanket. His arm brushed her shoulder. Her breath stopped for a beat. He went still as if he had heard it. He did not touch her again. By morning, the world smelled new. The land laid down its dust for a few hours. The horses wore a sheen where the rain had rinsed them. Kane stamped the fire cold saddled without speaking, and they rode back to the canyon. The lodge circle appeared out of cottonwood trunks and smoke. Women paused with hands full of corn. Men looked up and let their eyes pass on. Children stopped and then ran again. The storm had scrubbed the air clean, but the camp felt tighter, as if the night had pulled a knot somewhere. The council gathered before full light was gone from the canyon floor. Men sat in a rough circle, back straight, hands quiet on knees. The fire in the center was coals and a thin veil of flame. Chiefs and elders wore their years the way other men wore knives. Del Rio's gaze went to the rim of rock, then back to the faces around him. Old Sal sat on a flat stone, a blanket around her shoulders, although the evening still held heat. Evie stayed behind the near lodge with Marta. The old woman worked a stitch through rawhide with a bone-awl. She did not look at Evie as she spoke. "You stand when they call. You do not speak when they do not." At the chief's gesture, Evie stepped into the circle. The ground was hard with many feet. She smelled mesquite and old fat and river sand. Her pulse threaded where the rope had marked her wrists. Del Rio addressed Kane without looking away from Evie. "Soldiers were seen at the mouth of the canyon yesterday," he said. "Settlers ride with them. A dozen, maybe more." Kane's jaw worked once. He nodded. Old Sal stretched her hand toward Evie's lap where the book lay. Marta had tucked it there at the last moment as if she had known. The old woman squinted at the gold letters in the firelight. She breathed in through her nose a small, sharp sound. "Heart," she read. She spoke to the circle. "I know that name. A man with that name brought a church and soldiers to our river. We burned both. We buried our boys. He did not bury his words." A low shift traveled the men seated there, not a murmur. Something in the way they tilted their heads, a shared memory, turning in the same direction. Del Rio stared at Evie as if he could press through her face into the past. "He was my father," Evie said. The words were clean when they came. She could feel how wrong they would sit no matter how she shaped them. Kennecutt's father leaned forward, elbows on knees. His voice had the scrape of dry rock under a boot. "Give the girl back, and they walk away." Another elder shook his head. "They will not walk. They will see our horses, our children. They will come back with more." Rafe's uncle spoke without looking at Evie. "Bury her. Let the soldiers seek ghosts." Del Rio lifted a hand, and the talk closed like a door. He took a breath and let it out. His fingers tapped his thigh once. "There is one other way," he said. "Make her family. If she is ours, they do not rescue." The fire cracked. A coal settled. Someone shifted, and a beaded bracelet clicked on bone. Kenny snorted. "Who takes that poison into his bed?" The circle watched Del Rio. The chief looked at Kane. A long space opened there, quiet, full of a choice no one else could make. Kane's face did not turn. He stood just outside the light's reach, arms loose, palm cut by the pale line of his old scar. He had not looked at Evie since she had entered the fire ring. When he spoke, it was without ceremony. His voice did not climb. "She is my wife." Silence moved over the circle and took a seat. The air did not stir. Marta's needle stopped. Old Sal did not blink. Evie felt something drop through her and keep going heavy, real, impossible to catch. "She is my wife," Kane said again to the chief, to the men, to the fire. The words settled like a stone in a pool. Ripples went through faces and stopped. Del Rio inclined his head once, not approval, not refusal. He turned to the elders. Orders followed for sentries and scouts for fires banked low for children to stay within sight of the lodges. The council broke along quiet lines. Marta touched Evie's elbow and started walking. Kane did not come near. He spoke with Del Rio in a hush that carried no heat. Evie walked with the old woman through the circle and felt the camp change shape around her. The looks were different. Appraisal edged with something else. Curiosity, calculation. A woman handing off a basket did not offer the handle to Evie. She pushed it hard into Evie's hands. A girl followed with twine and watched Evie's face as if it might teach her something. Marta lifted the hide flap of a small lodge near the canyon wall. Smoke and light shifted inside. A low fire worked in a stone ring. A pallet of furs lay against the far wall. A small shelf of woven reeds held a knife, a needle roll, a folded blanket. The place smelled like tanned leather and sage that had once been burned. Marta pointed at the furs. There, she said. She dropped a folded shirt the color of dust into Evie's lap. Where? She studied Evie's wrists, traced the rope marks without touching, then pinched her chin lightly the way a grandmother tests a child's strength. She left without closing the flap. Evie set the Bible on the shelf and the button beside it. The button clicked and then was quiet. She changed into the shirt. The fabric rasped her skin and left a dust of fibers on her arms. When she stepped outside, the light had shifted toward evening. Kane stood with his hand on the lodge pole, as if the post was keeping him from floating away. "You decided for me," she said. Her throat felt tight. He did not move his hand. "I decided for the camp. And for my body," she said. "He took that. He let it sit. If I had waited for the council, they would have put a rope around your wrists again. I am not a horse." "No," he said, "a horse I can turn with 2 fingers. Then what am I here?" He looked at her then straight and level. "A person who breathes where I breathe." He tipped his head toward the inside of the lodge. "You sleep. I sit. I am not sleeping in your bed. It is not my bed. It is a place where a body can be warm." He walked to the doorway, dropped to a crouch, and set his back to the hide flap. He settled as if he had done this a long time. He did not look at her again. The posture made a door of his spine. Her body had more opinions than her pride. It wanted the furs. She lay down without saying anything. She watched his shadow shift on the hide with the firelight. His breathing stayed even slower than hers. When sleep came, it came like a weight on her shoulders. Morning lifted the canyon air clean and thin. The camp went to work the way hearts keep time. Evie fell into the moving parts because not moving would have been worse. Marta put tools in her hands and changed them when she bled. A woman with a long braid and a scar on her upper lip pushed a basket of mesquite beans into Evie's arms and pointed with her chin. Evie opened the pods and knocked the seeds free with a stick, while a child watched with a severity that made Evie want to be careful. Around midday, a sound shaped the stillness, a cough that had no bark to it, thin and wet. It came from the lodge near the cottonwoods. A woman came out and stood in the sun with her hands around her own elbows. She was not old. Her gaze slid over Evie and away, not hostile, just empty with worry. Marta clucked. "Soda," she said. "Her boy." Evie set the basket down. Her thumb throbbed where the scraper had torn it. She walked to the lodge and stopped at the door. The air inside was warm and sour. A child lay on a blanket with his hair stuck to his forehead. His chest worked too hard for the small air he got. A man knelt near the fire and sang low, head rocking. He dipped his fingers in pollen and drew lines along the child's brow. The mother stood stiff near the wall and looked at Evie like a person looks at something that might fall and break. "I can help," Evie said. The words came out in English because she did not have the others. She set her hands where they could be seen. "Open empty." The mother's mouth tightened. Marta's voice came from the doorway. "Let her," she said. She did not say please. Evie knelt and touched the child's skin with the back of her knuckles. Heat leaped into her. She looked for Willow with her eyes and found a strip of bark hanging dry on a peg in the corner. She held it up. The mother's chin moved once. Evie brewed a bitter tea in a clay cup and fanned it cool with her hand. The child's lips barely parted. She dribbled the tea along his gum line. He swallowed because the body will fight to live. She crushed herbs from the small roll she had saved in her carpet bag. Her father had carried them when he called it mercy to visit the sick. She mixed a paste with hot water and smeared it over the little ribs where the lungs knocked. The medicine man did not stop singing. He watched her hands and sang into the places where the paste would need to take hold. Night stretched and thinned. The lodge breathed with them. The mother's eyes went from empty to sharp. She lifted the boy when Evie said, "Lift," set him up when Evie said up, chased a cup from hand to mouth when Evie said, "Now." By dawn, the child cried, once small and angry, and reached for the cup with both hands. The sound went through the room like a blessing no one named. Evie went outside and squinted into the white part of the morning. Her hands shook. They smelled of willow and sweat. She sat on a stone and felt the cold push into her bones. Kane came and stood near without stepping into her shadow. "You did well," he said. "I watched him breathe all night," she said. "It felt like if I stopped looking, he would forget." "You are like water," he said. Rock thinks it is stronger until its shape changes. She did not look at him. Who changed your shape? He touched his scar with 2 fingers and let them fall. My sister's name was Lark. She laughed when she ran. She ran that morning until hooves caught up. Men tied my father with his own rope and burned our houses. Lark did not come home. When we found her, she did not laugh. I stayed quiet after that. The quiet was a place to stand. Evie sat with his words. She could see a girl running toward brush that would not hide her. She could feel the way silence can be a wall instead of a room. My father delivered sermons like knives, she said. I used to mouth the words for him where the congregation could not see. I thought that made me useful. It made me complicit. He brought soldiers into someone else's river and called it grace. Cain looked at her then, not like a man measuring a risk, like a man confirming a fact. Near noon, Evie carried an empty water skin down to the wash. Cottonwood leaves flashed their pale sides to show the wind a path. She knelt and let the sap smell rise. When she looked up, a glint caught her eye high on the ridge. Not Micah, not a bird. Glass held to an eye. A man crouched among rocks with his hat brim pulled low and his attention narrowed to a point. The point was her. She did not shout. She stood and walked like a person without urgency. The skin of her back prickled. She could feel the line of sight on it, the way a person feels a fly without touching it. At the turn, she ran. By the time she reached the circle of lodges, Cain already knew. Scouts had seen sign on the far ridge at the canyon mouth. He spoke with Del Rio in voices that did not carry. The chief sent boys to gather horses and move meat from racks into baskets. Old Sal sat down on a stone and set her palms on her knees like an anchor. Before sundown, a rider came under a white cloth flag along the lower path. He kept his hands high and his eyes sliding. He had a limp not old, maybe affected. Marta called him by name without affection. Luis. He accepted a drink from a girl and swallowed too fast. They are at the fort in number, he said in Spanish, and then in a rough English that looked to Evie like a trade had sanded it. The captain says a soldier is dead. He says the band is hostile. There is paper, too. He patted his vest as if it could hide what he had already decided to show. He unfolded a handbill with ink that had not quite dried. The letters were big enough to read from far. Evelyn Hart, taken, defiled. $100 in gold for Cane Ridge alive or dead. Evie saw her name before she saw the lie. She held the paper and felt it blow against her fingers like a moth. She tasted iron that was not dust. Del Rio's jaw stood out and then went flat. He spoke to Cain not loud. We will not fight them for a woman the white world has turned into a flag. We move south. We split. Families first. Old ones with them. Warriors watch the rear and then vanish. Kenny's voice came in hard. Give her to them and be done. Del Rio did not look at him. No. The council bent around a decision and set it in the ground. Men rose. Women tightened bundles. Children were gathered like seeds. The camp broke with the grace of hands that had done this often enough to keep breathing while they did it. Cain came to Evie's side without stopping his feet. I ride north, he said. They will follow me. You mean to throw yourself out to sea and call that a plan, she said. Her throat felt raw from the night smoke. They hunt me. He looked at the paper again without taking it. You are safer with Del Rio. She held his gaze. Do not put me where you think women belong. I belong where I choose. He set his mouth, not stubborn, braced. You chose last night to sleep in my lodge. I chose to live. Today, I choose the same thing. She stepped closer until she could see the sunline caught in the scar at his mouth. I go with you. His breath left him in a way that was not a sigh. It sounded like surrender to a fact. He nodded once. Bring water, he said. Bring the book if you carry it. No more. Marta appeared with a bundle before Evie had turned. She pressed dried meat into Evie's palm, then a needle roll, then the Bible. She kissed Evie's forehead as if she had tasted something there and wanted to keep it. Her lips were dry and warm. Hold your head up, she said. They left as the canyon walls pulled blue out of stone. They rode with their backs low and their eyes on the high edges. The trail tightened into a cut where rock breathed cold. A hawk floated far above as if pinned there. Evie's horse set its feet careful on the slick places where old water had rubbed the path smooth. A pebble ticked down from the rim. A voice came from the rock, loud and pleased. There, the squaw man and his prize. The sound popped in the narrow place. The first shot slammed the wall beside Evie's cheek and threw grit into her eyes. Her horse bunched under her. Another shot cracked, and the canyon filled with the stink of powder. Cain was off his horse before she could find breath. He used the animal's body as a shield and brought his rifle up. The second shout ended in a grunt that cut off mid-syllable. The third voice yelled for blood. The canyon answered with echo and smoke. Stone splinters flicked her cheek. Evie tasted grit and metal. She threw herself behind a fold in the wall and heard Kane's rifle bark. A man on the rim toppled with his legs loose under him. Another voice cursed and fired wild. Smoke hung in the narrow air like a dirty curtain. A heavy footstep scuffed on gravel behind a tooth of rock. A man stepped out on the canyon floor with a sharps held level. He was thick through the chest and wore a coat that had once been brown. His beard was the color of wet straw. His eyes were small and satisfied. "Wade Harkins," Kane said without looking at Evie. Harkins smiled as if they were about to trade jokes. He ticked his rifle a fraction. "I like a job that pays in gold and cleans up a mess for the good people." Kane shifted to get his shot. A crack from above threw chips off the rock, and Kane grunted. He folded at the thigh and went to one knee. Blood ran hard through his fingers where he pressed his leg. Harkins sighted down the sharps and did not hurry. Evie's hands moved before she knew what they were moving for. Kane's pistol sat heavy on his belt. She pulled it free and held both hands around the grip. Harkins turned the barrel toward her as if this was a new game he intended to win. "Step aside, girl," he said. "Your name is on a paper. I can make all that tidy." Evie's breath went shallow. The world shrank to a bead on a front sight and the place between his eyes. She did not feel her wrists where the rope had lived. She did not feel her shoulder where Kane had held her down on a horse. She felt the weight of the metal and the sound the pistol would make. "I'm not yours to tidy," she said. She pulled the trigger. The noise punched the air out of the canyon. Harkins rocked back with his mouth open and a surprised look on his face. The sharps dropped from his hands and clanged on stone. He folded as if his legs had forgotten their jobs. The last shot from the rim came late and wrong. It chewed rock beside Kane, and then quiet returned in a rush. Evie blinked hard. The ringing faded. She heard Kane breathe like a man holding a door closed with his shoulder. She scrambled to him and saw the wound. The ball had torn the high inside of his thigh. Blood pulsed. His skin was the color of old paper. "Get up," he said, though the word was a ghost. She got her shoulder under his arm and heaved. He rose because she did. They lurched into a shadowed seam in the canyon wall behind a curtain of dead vines. Cool air touched her face. The hollow inside was narrow and dark. She eased him down onto sand. His eyes had gone far away and were coming back. "Knife," he said. "Fire." Her mouth went dry. She built a little pile of sticks that felt too small for the need and used flint until sparks caught. The flame licked and then climbed. She heated the long knife until the metal glowed. The smell turned sharp. "Bite this," she said, and pushed a strip of leather between his teeth. He nodded once. She took a breath that did not fill her up. She pressed the hot blade to the torn place. His body arched. His eyes rolled white. The sound that came out of him was not a shout. It was a deep animal moan that made her own chest hurt. The smell of burned meat filled the cave. Tears ran down her face without her permission. She held the blade until the bleeding slowed and then set it away from skin. He went slack. For a heartbeat she thought she had pushed him across some edge he could not find his way back from. She put her ear to his chest and found a steady knock under the fumes of smoke. Relief hit her so hard her knees gave. She cleaned what she could with water and herbs from a small folded cloth she'd kept for too many miles. She wrapped the leg with a strip she tore from her underskirt. Her hands did not stop shaking until the fire burned down to a low red eye. They waited until late light leaned gold into the canyon. Evie found Harkins's horse and a mule tied near a bend where the men had left them. She led the animals into the shadow and loaded what she could carry without dropping anything: canteens, cartridges, a small axe. She took Harkin's coat and cut off the blood-stained sleeve. She left the bag with coins where it lay because the thought of it made her mouth taste wrong. Kane tried to stand and did not. She tied him to the saddle with a rope across his chest and belly. He swayed but stayed on. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up on the other horse with a grunt. The animals started forward as if the canyon had told them it was time. They moved on until the walls opened and night took the brightness out of the rocks. They turned toward a small spur of hills where Don Calero kept a shelter. The old man met them at the door with his good eye sharp and the other grayed like a pearl. He did not ask who Evie was. He looked at Kane's leg and clicked his tongue. He sang as he worked a sound that seemed to smooth the air. He told Evie where to set water, and when to lift, and when to hold still. He laid his hands along the edge of the wound and spoke a word until the flesh looked less angry. Kane burned for 2 nights, heat shining off his skin like a bad sun. Evie traded sleep for a bowl and a cloth. The old man's chant ran under the hours. When Kane's fever broke, it did not announce itself. His breath simply changed to a deeper reed. He opened his eyes and found Evie's hand near his own. He caught her fingers without speaking. On the third day, Luis Ortega rode in with his hat pulled low. He smiled too quick and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Don Calero did not offer him a seat. Luis took water anyway and drank with his eyes on the rim of the cup. "The fort sends out more men," he said to the room, as if the walls had asked. "They talk of a dead soldier. They say the band is done." Del Rio fell on the dry ground behind his people. Kenny wore iron on his wrists when they took him east. He patted his vest. "There is also this." He unfolded another handbill. The ink had soaked into the cheap paper. The words were the same in a different town's hand. Evie stepped outside with the paper and stood in the bright. The letters swam. She remembered the boy's cough near the cottonwoods and the way the mother had breathed when the child finally cried. The thought of the camp breaking into pieces sat on her chest. Kane came to the door with the cane the old man had pressed into his hand. He held himself up and watched her. She swallowed and could not swallow enough. "This is mine," she said. "I carry it. I brought the soldiers to their door." He moved down the step one careful foot at a time. He stood in front of her until she had to meet his eyes. "I saw you on the road," he said. "You did not beg. You stood like a tree in wind. I chose that fire. Del Rio chose his fight. Cutter chose his mouth. Do not take their choices from them. Do not take mine." The words landed and stayed. She nodded once. The old man watched them both and shook tobacco into a pipe. Luis leaned in the doorway and looked toward the shallow wash where a good deal could happen. His gaze skipped when Evie met it. He smiled wide and showed a gold tooth that had not been there last season. "Supplies are dear," he said. "I can fetch flour and powder from town. I can meet you at the Red Arroyo. 3 days." Kane set a small leather bag on the table. It sounded like stone when it hit. Luis's eyes warmed. He folded the bag into his vest as if it belonged there. They left before dawn on the third day and reached the arroyo when the wind had taken heat but not yet the light. The wash ran shallow and crooked. Cottonwood roots laced the bank like fingers. It was quiet in a way that did not feel right. Evie smelled gun oil before she saw the men on the rim. The first shot cut a branch above her head and tossed leaves through sunlight. A second bit into the bank and spit dirt on Kane's boot. The sound bounced from wall to wall until it was many guns. "Move," Kane said. He slid from the saddle with his weight on the good leg and pulled Evie down with him. He dragged her to a shelf of rock that gave a hand's width of cover and propped the rifle across it. He fired once. A hat flew. A head did not come up where it had been. Evie watched the line of the far bank. She could see a place where the roots splayed and shadows went darker. "Through there," she said, "water goes under." Kane looked where she pointed. He nodded and braced his shoulders. They crawled on elbows with the rifles in front of them. The world narrowed to dirt under nails, to the slap of heart against ribs, to the taste of rotten leaves where water hid. Shots kept time over their backs. Evie slid into the roots and felt cold water grip her wrists. She pushed. The gap widened enough to take a body on its side. She went first. Mud pulled at her shirt. She came out in a pocket behind a fallen log that had a small hole of sky over it. Kane came after with his teeth set. They lay in the shadow and listened. The men on the rim swore and fanned out. They were guessing now. A horse screamed on the far bank. Someone yelled a name and then called for help. Silence worked back in. Evie counted a slow number until her hands stopped making fists on their own. Kane touched her shoulder and pointed along the bank to where the wash turned and trees threaded closer. They moved that way with their bodies low. When they reached the bend, the wind shifted and took the smell of powder off the air. They did not go back to the arroyo. They kept south with care. The land changed. The hills folded tighter and then opened. The plants skewed toward thorn and shade. Heat came up from the ground in slow waves and did not break. Their horses blew and set their feet with care on rock that had been polished by old water. Near late light, they found a wall of vines that had no right to be where they were. A trickle of water ticked under it. Evie put her hand against the green and felt cool through leaf and stem. She pushed. The vines lifted with the weight of years on them. They passed through into a bowl of land hidden by red rock. A spring came out of stone and made a clear thread that curled into grass. Cottonwoods marked the path of its movement like tall green flags. The cliffs rose sheer and smooth. Birds flared up and settled. Evie's legs shook, though she was standing still. She let her hand fall into the spring and lifted it. Water ran through her fingers and made a sound like relief. Kane stood with his weight on the cane and looked without talking. The place held its own silence, the kind that gives back what you put into it. The horses dropped their heads and drank. The air tasted of wet stone. The light went soft on the red walls and held there. Evie closed her eyes and listened to the water write its line through the grass. They worked with what the valley gave. Mud was easy. Straw was not. Evie cut dry grass with Harkin's knife until the skin between her thumb and finger blistered. Kane dug with the small axe where the clay rose yellow near the spring. She mixed mud and straw with her hands, feet soaking in the cold water until her bones stopped aching. They filled crude frames and slid them free. The bricks baked in sun that took its time. A wall grew, then another. A roof came by pieces, willow on a ridge beam brush in layers, clay over all until the light only reached through the doorway. Kane measured with his eye and the flat of his palm. He wove a door from reeds and vine, his bad legs set and braced. When his breath thinned, he sat and shaved latches smooth. Evie built a hearth with stones the water had rounded. She tested the draw of the smoke with handfuls of brittle grass. When the flame held, she sat back and watched the smoke take the dark up and away. The room smelled like earth and heat. It smelled like a place. The silver button stayed in her pocket until the walls were high enough to keep wind. The morning she left the rim of the valley kept its own counsel. Kane did not tell her to stay and did not ask her to hurry. He carved a notch in a cottonwood and set a piece of bright cloth where it could catch the eye from a distance. He leaned his cane against the door and touched his hand to the scar on his mouth as if to make sure it was still part of him. The hamlet lay in a fold of hills 2 days south. A chapel bell rang noon for a town that did not stop. Women crossed a square with baskets on their hips. A man in a white hat weighed beans with a patience that did not mean kindness. Evie stood at his small counter with a brown paper sack between them. He lifted 3 packets of seed corn in one beans and another squash in the third. His finger tapped the wood. She placed the button on the worn plank. Its face caught the light. He did not pick it up. He slid it toward his teeth and bit down. He nodded once and wrapped the seeds in newsprint. He did not ask her name. He did not look past her shoulder to see if anyone followed. On the way home, she skirted dry arroyos and walked the horses in the open, where grass would show if a rider came from behind. The valley opened the same way it had closed. She pushed through the curtain of green and felt the air change. Kane stood in the doorway with his hand on the cane. She set the packets on the table and laughed a sound that surprised her. He lifted the top one like it might break in his grasp. Corn. He tapped the packet to his forehead and set it back down. The corner of his mouth moved and then was still. They planted with a stick and a lesson she had read in a book long ago, and a lesson he carried in the bend of his elbow. Mounds with space between. Beans to climb. Squash to shade the ground. Water at dusk. When the first sprout showed pale and curved like a question, she crouched and touched the leaf with a finger. The shape was simple. The feeling behind her ribs was not. Evening found them inside with the ledger open. She had found it crushed at the bottom of a saddlebag under rope and cloth and a tin cup that had once been part of a kitchen. The paper had lines that made her hand behave. She drew columns even when she did not need them. She pointed at the doorframe and raised her eyebrows. Kane said a word and then another when she shaped it wrong. She wrote the word as she heard it. He leaned with his shoulder against the wall and watched her letters settle. His correction was a smile that barely showed. He tapped the ledger with a finger when a word landed the way it should. Some nights he told a story of a coyote that tricked a bear, of a woman who made rain with her hair, of how mountains held up the edge of the sky. She wrote while he spoke, and her hand seemed to know when to hurry and when to go slow. The book filled. The room that had been mostly wall and smoke and sleep took on another layer. The silence that had been protection turned into a place where voices could sit human and soft. The valley kept its rules. Rabbits ran at dawn in a line that traced the grass. Kane set snares where paths were thin. He taught Evie to see sign that did not want to be seen. She learned the lean of a deer's foot in dust and the way a bird's alarm will say more than a shout. She heard water under stone. She smelled rain before the sky looked ready. Not every night slept. Evie would waken with her hand already reaching for the pistol under the pillow, her mouth filled with the taste of powder that was not there. Kane would roll to his side and pull her against his chest until the breath inside them matched. He would not say you are safe. He would put his chin in her hair and stay until her fists forgot to be fists. Other nights, he would sit up fast with a sound that had no word in it. She would light a small lamp and put his hand around the cup and keep a palm between his shoulders until his eyes came back. He sometimes said lark without knowing it. She would say yes without telling him to wake. On a morning when the cicadas had started, and the air already held heat, the smell of roasted quail pushed her stomach wrong. She stepped outside and breathed the scent of wet clay near the spring. It did not help. She counted days on a string of beads she had made from a broken rosary. The count told the truth. Her hands shook and then were still. She walked back inside and looked at the hearth and the door and the shelf with the ledger and his knife and the Bible. She looked everywhere except at him. He roasted meat with a care that had more to do with watching her than with the food. He set a piece on a plate and pushed it toward her. She stared until the rims of the plate went soft. She pushed it back. It felt like she had set a rock between them. He stood weight on the cane and stepped outside. The doorframe took him in and then put him out again. She heard his boots stop in the dust. The silence did not stretch. He returned and knelt on the packed earth in front of her. His scar sat sharp in the firelight. He placed his hands on her belly. He did not ask permission and did not take anything from her. He lowered his head until his hair hid his eyes. He did not speak for a long time. When he looked up, the softness in his face had a bright edge. "You're afraid," he said. "They will put names on a child and use them like blades." She pressed her lips together. It hurt to find the words. Where does such a child belong? He set his palm flat and warm. "Here," he said, "with you, with me, not half, whole, both. We will teach our words and our truths. We will teach water and fire." He lifted her hand and set it over his. The skin against skin felt like oath. Her shoulders dropped. She let breath come as if it had been waiting behind a closed door. She did not trust the world outside the red wall, but this room had its own laws. He kept his hands where they were, until she leaned forward and put her forehead to his. The smell of sage rose from the blanket rolled on the shelf. The stew went cold. The fear cooled too. Summer made work, and work made sleep. Their corn grew tall. The beans found the stalks, and the squash shaded the soil. Cain's limp eased a little as the leg learned new paths. He could not run, but he could move with a hunter's patience. Evie's hands hardened and stained. The ledger thickened with words bent around new ideas and old songs. When the first frost marked the grass white at dawn, they built a small stack of firewood under a leaning rock where rain could not find it. Cain taught her how to listen to wood. Cottonwood for quick light, juniper for a scent that goes sweet, oak for a heat that stays when you close your eyes. They saved a few ears of corn unshucked and hung them near the door where air could pass. The day snow came, the sky closed over like a lid. Flakes moved slow and found places to sit on red stone. The spring kept its thread. The doorway lifted a square of white light and then dimmed when the clouds thickened. The room held warmth. The hearth gave a steady talk. Cain sat with his back to the wall and one leg stretched along the furs. He rubbed his thumb along the cane as if it were a worry stone. Evie settled beside him and took his hand to set on the round of her belly. The child answered with a small push. He stilled, then smiled in a way that went all the way up. He sang, not loud, a song that laid pictures where words could not. Rain leaving the mountain to find the plain. Deer laying its bones down so grass could grow. A woman braiding her hair in the morning to keep wind from stealing it. The tune had steps and returns. It lived in his chest and came out his throat in a tone the room seemed to know already. Evie closed her eyes. The fire clicked. The frost on the doorway beam softened and slid. She felt the weight of his hand, the press of the child's turn. Her own hand found the ledger where it lay and opened it without looking. The page caught a bit of light. She set the pencil in the margin and did not write. The song was enough. Later, when the room had gone blue with evening, and the last coal held a small red, she rose and tucked more wood into the hearth. He slept with his mouth just open, the scar pulled mild by the slack of rest. She stepped to the door and looked at the snow against the red cliff. The world outside was still. The telegraph wire she could not see did not matter here. The button that had been a dress and became seeds had turned into green and then food. Water ran in its line and said nothing. She went back to the furs and slid under the blanket. His hand found her without waking. She rested her palm over his and let the heat from the fire soak through cloth and skin. The walls kept wind. The book kept words. The valley kept them. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.